and share my screen to launch our PowerPoint, and we will get going. Okay, Chicago Title proudly presents Open to Closed, a new agent intro to escrow and title. Our agenda today, we will cover what we need up front to get going with the escrow, the earnest money deposit, the digital opening package sent to your sellers and buyers, the 3 big things to look for on your prelim, escrow flow, your client signing, top tips for a smooth closing, and a Q&A to answer all your questions. So with that being said, I am going to turn it over to Anna Getman to get started.
Good morning, everybody. I'm so glad that you decided to be here this morning to enrich your knowledge in your career and be the best agent you can possibly be in this market. If you have any questions, like Jennifer said, just pop them in the chat. I tend to talk quickly, so if I'm going too quick or I'm speaking too fast, just put in the chat if you wanted me to slow down a little bit, because I get excited, and so I tend to talk a little fast. So don't feel bad to ask me. Don't feel bad asking for me to slow down. So this morning, like Jennifer said, we're going to cover start to finish, from open to close, the escrow and title process of your transaction. So today, when an escrow gets open, typically everybody's excited. Buyers are excited, sellers are excited, both agents are excited, lenders are excited, and guess what? Escrow and title are very, very excited because we are honored that we were chosen to handle your transaction. So when the escrow gets open, it typically gets opened by the listing agent, the agent that is representing the seller. Okay, so they will forward that fully executed contract to us to be able to open escrow. A little bit of a side note. Okay. In this market, or lately, in the last year or so, we have been opening pre-escrows. Doesn't mean the escrow is officially open, but it's a pre-escrow where the listing agent may have, after the listing agreement has been executed by the seller, has opened a pre-escrow. And what that means is that they have requested a preliminary title report to just jump on any kind of red flags or issues. But we'll cover that a little bit later. But just so you know, you might come across to where the listing agent says, great, thank you for the offer. Your offer has been accepted. Escrow is going to be open with Chicago Title, and I've already requested a preliminary title report. So just a side note for there. And then so we will go ahead and get the fully executed contract from the listing agent. I do want everybody to just take a quick note that the selling agent, the agent that is representing the buyer, it's super important, so important when you're writing up your offers to submit to the listing agent to present to the seller. It is so important to make sure that your contract's fully, everything's filled in that is pertinent to that transaction. All the information, the buyer's names, how they're supposed to be spelled out, or how they want their name to be in the transaction. And most important is agent contact information. I want to tell you, there's so many times where I'm having to maybe, Google someone's contact information, and I hate for it to be the wrong information, or maybe the internet has your previous office that you were at. But it's so important in the last page of the contract, on page 16, that you put your contact phone number, your email address, because we want to be able to give you the escrow number as soon as possible, so you can have that great feeling that, hey, yay, escrow is open, we have an escrow number, because oftentimes I'm unable to send that as quickly as I'd like, because I'm having to maybe email back the listing agent and say, hey, by any chance, do you have the selling agent's email address? Because it's not on the contract. Sometimes we get the contract where everybody's CC'd on the email, which is great, but it's probably a good practice to make sure that all of the information that you possibly have, including yourself as an agent, is on that contract. So when it says fully executed purchase contract and all addendums, that is a good practice, a side note, just so you can have it in your head, like, I got to get all this information on there. I know you're racing to get your offer submitted to that listing agent, so you can make sure that you're in there and you're ready to be presented to that seller. But guess what? If your offer gets accepted, it's super important that it's fully executed and has all the information that's pertinent. The next thing, that once we get the contract, we open up the escrow, we send out the congratulations email, and we give you that escrow number. It's super important that you provide your escrow unit your client's contact information. And when I say contact information, I mean a cell phone number, an email address, because they're going to get requests from us for additional information. And so we don't want a wrong phone number or a wrong email address, or no phone number or no email address for that matter. So make sure that you're providing your escrow unit all of the pertinent good contact information for your buyer, for your seller, whoever you're representing. And if you're representing a buyer, make sure you provide the escrow unit who the lender is going to be, who's going to be processing that buyer's loan. Okay. And then oftentimes you may or may not have this if you were pulling net sheets for your seller, to try to figure out, what offer to accept and what you want to see what the numbers look like for your seller before you accept an offer, and you have the payoff information, not the actual amount to pay off, but you have an idea because you obtained a mortgage statement from your seller, and it has a principal balance, and you're just using that just as an estimate. If you have that payoff information, go ahead and provide it to your escrow unit, just because it's one step that you're ahead, because we will reach out to your sellers and ask them who their payoff lender is. But if we have that, that's one less thing that we have to ask. But if you don't, it's not a big deal. It's not the end of the world. And it is our job to obtain that information, but if it would be helpful if you did. Okay. And then also, this kind of circles back a little bit to the contract, the one I said fully executed contract and fully, filled out contract, any HOA information that you may have. And then the reason why I say that is because sometimes there's the HOA is marked and we're kind of trying to figure out who's managing it. A lot of the times we do have a database. Don't get me wrong, but a lot of the times, like maybe the smaller HOAs that don't have a lot of turnover, so we may have a difficult time obtaining it. And as you know, because you're knowing your contract, there is a time frame that we have to get that HOA information to the buyer in a specific time frame. So if you have the HOA information, or if you don't, ask your seller, hey, Mr. Seller, hey, Mrs. Seller, who manages your HOA? I'd love to provide that information to the escrow unit so they're one step ahead and we can get this transaction off to a good start. Quick little side note too, there are HOAs here in town. There are homes here in town that are within a HOA. However, there's also a second HOA. So maybe ask that question to your seller. Once you ask who the HOA, by any chance, is there a second HOA that manages? So just a nice little question to put in there and ask, so we know that we have as much information that's available as possible. And then if you're out in your listing appointment and you get the listing and listing is signed and you notice solar panels up on the roof, ask that question. Are the solar panels owned? Who is your solar contract through? Ask these questions. Sometimes they say, yes, they're owned. And lo and behold, they paid the solar company for it. However, they took a credit line, or they borrowed money from a credit union and took that money and paid the solar company, but that credit union files a financial statement on title to secure their interest that they had fronted that money to pay for that solar. So ask the questions. And so if you have that solar information, go ahead and input that, or just let us know that there's solar, when you're opening up that escrow, because a lot of times you'll say there's solar, we don't see anything on the prelim, and that leads us to believe that's it is owned, but we don't want to just go with that. Everybody's human. There's human error, and so if it's not owned and we were supposed to do a transfer and we didn't know that there was solar because it's not showing up on the thing, you see where I'm going to this. So as much information as possible. If you say there's solar panels up on the roof, I don't know if they're owned, just so you know, escrow officer, there may be solar. Okay. And then any special circumstances surrounding the escrow. If your client needs an extra, TLC, or, be handled with kid gloves, go ahead and tell your escrow officer, hey, escrow officer, I just need you to know that these clients, they're super important. They're special just like any other client, but they may need a little bit more attention. Or guess what? They don't do email, or they, just whatever. It's so important that you give this information, because it's our job to make sure that we're a third mutual party. But it's our job to make sure that everything has been taken care of and everybody is feeling great and that the transaction is being handled with care. But if we know that that seller doesn't use email, we're going to stop, and we're going to make sure that that seller has our contact information, that has our phone number. If they have any questions, call that seller to say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I understand you don't use an email, but here's my phone number. Call me if you have any questions or if there's any needs. Or guess what? If you don't use email, we have some upfront documentation that we'd like to get filled out. Can I have you come in for 5-10 minutes and fill those forms out? It's going to help our transaction run smoothly. So anything like that, please let your escrow officer know. And it could even be on the other end of the spectrum, hey, my sellers are super busy. They don't answer their phone. They love text messages and emails. Great. We're going to mark our file and be like, sellers are digital, they like everything digital. So we're going to send them text messages, because we have the ability to text sellers and buyers and agents and lenders. But we're going to text them. We're going to email them. So you got one end of the spectrum as opposed to the other. Just let us know. And anything that falls in between, any special circumstances, whether it's a divorce or they're going to be married soon. The buyers are going to be married soon, but they're going to close before they're going to be married. So it kind of gives us an idea of what we're asking your clients, what's going to happen. So just let us know. Okay. Getting the earnest money to escrow. So there's a few ways we accept payment. We accept personal checks, and personal checks are fine. They're good. The only time that they're not okay and they're not fine is if our transaction is a quick close. And when I say quick close, is if it's under 2 weeks or 2 weeks or less, because we have to bank those personal checks, and we have to make sure that they're processed accordingly, and the bank has enough time to make sure that the funds have been that the funds are sufficient, and so on and so forth. We don't want to close and then we come back for whatever reason, and because things happen, buyers say, oh, I transferred money, or I hadn't had a chance to transfer money from the account that all my money is coming from. Things happen. So personal checks are most likely not going to be okay in any transaction that's going to be 2 weeks or less. So it's a good idea to either submit a cashier's check in that situation, or wire funds, which are the next two items that we accept: cashier's check and wire funds. And the mobile deposits through Start in Here is one of our new methods of receiving payment. It's been working great. It's wonderful. It allows the buyer to get their money in as quickly as possible without making any extra trips to the bank. But that is in a form of a personal check. So just so you know, side note, starting here is a way to submit their mobile deposit for an escrow that's going to be more than 2 weeks. I do want to express, it doesn't happen very often, but it has happened a few times just this month, where the buyer has did their check through starting here, and they either forgot to sign it or they filled out the amount in the little box but didn't complete the word of the amount, the word spelling of the amount. So there's twice this month we weren't able to accept the check that was submitted through the starting here. What it is it allows them to take a picture of the check, and then where our system is able to process that and deposit it like if it was a physical check that we've had in our hands. But if it's not completed correctly or isn't signed, we have to reject it. And so it becomes a little bit of a problem. But so just maybe mention to your buyer, if you're going to submit your mobile deposit through the starting here application, please be sure that your check is filled out correctly and all the information is in on the check. Okay. So the next slide goes to what I had already mentioned a little bit earlier, is the digital opening package that, for your clients that that don't mind receiving emails and receiving security codes on their cell phone to access our portal that obtains a lot of the pertinent information, personal information. So that's why they have to, we have to have a cell phone number. A landline does work, but that landline's going to be, that we're going to use that landline, and when they answer that landline, that code is going to be repeated over that landline. If they're doing it at work or they're doing it, outside of their home, then they're not going to get that code that's necessary. So it's a good rule of thumb is to provide us a cell phone number in order for us to properly process the starting here digital opening package. So what will happen is once we get the escrow open and we have inputted all of the information for the buyer, the seller, and any particulars for the transaction, within 24 hours, your client will receive an email that's named Starting Here, and it is the digital opening package. And for sellers, it's going to have an owner information sheet and a statement of information. And that owner information sheet is asking questions like, do you have a first, a second, or even a third mortgage? Do you have an HOA? If any of these items apply, please provide us information within the spaces allotted so that we are able to, number one, order your payoff information, number two, order the HOA. If it doesn't, they can, if they choose to fill out one or not the other, that's fine. Just know that if we do get the preliminary title report, and it does call for a statement information, we're going to have to reach back out and ask them to fill it out or physically fill it out, where they have an option to fill it out digitally. So in regards to that, that is basically what the digital opening package is. And for the buyers, it is a vesting form. So it allows us to obtain how they want their name to be read on title and how they want to hold title, whether it's unmarried woman, a single man, and husband and wife as joint tenants, wife and husband as community property, husband and wife as community property with right of survivorship. There's a lot of ways for them to hold title. Now, if you want to go ahead and contact your Chicago title sales exec, because you want your buyers to have all their options in front of them, we have a vesting information form. We cannot advise the clients how to be vested, but we do have a very good form that does allow them to read the vesting, how each vesting and what it means. So just reach out to your sales exec and they'll be happy to go ahead and provide that vesting form. It's very informational. It's very nice. So if you want to provide that to your buyers, you can. And then also, I know I said that if you can choose, they can choose to fill out one form and or not. There are certain forms that if they started but they haven't submitted it, they can go log back in and finish the process. It allows them a few days to go in and complete it. If they don't decide not to complete it at all, our system automatically sends out reminders, and I believe it sends out 4 reminders. I do often have times where a buyer or seller will call me and they just don't want to fill those out, which is fine. It's completely okay. We're just trying to streamline and make things easier. But I do let them know when they do call me and say, I'm just not comfortable putting this information out in the web, even though it's a secure portal. They're still not comfortable, and that's okay. So I do tell them while on that conversation, that's fine. You can come in and provide us information. You can even fax it to us. We can take the information over the phone, but just know that our system automatically sends out reminders. So don't panic. We're not harassing you. Just ignore those emails. So if your client tells you that Chicago Title keeps sending me these emails and I already told them that I'm not going to do it, it's just a reminder. That is all. But it is very helpful if your clients choose to use the portal and fill out that information, because within the first week of the escrow, we can very well have the payoff and have the HOA and all the information. And when the lender's asking me, hey, how's Mr. and Mrs. Buyer taking title, we're able to tell them, and we're able to provide them the information so they can process the loan, and there's not any delays. So this is all put in place to be able to streamline your transaction. Okay. The next slide is going to be the escrow flow. I'm not going to go over this. This is for you to have, if you want. I believe Jennifer is going to provide this to all the attendees. But if we do have this, so if you want like a physical copy where you can actually, it's a little bit difficult to read. I'm not going to lie. But it's a nice little dial, so you can kind of follow through if what's one of your first few transactions and you want to just kind of figure out what's going to happen next. This is something good to have on hand and just to kind of go through, or making sure that you're not missing anything, or there's a step that you weren't sure about, and it kind of gives you a little bit of a snapshot. So this is the escrow flow. So 1 through 16. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of flow or steps in an escrow, but there are so many participants in an escrow, all the way from buyers, sellers, termite companies, home warranty companies, fire insurance companies. There's so many participants in an escrow, but this is helpful just to kind of give you an idea of who's doing what and when. Okay. The preliminary title report, you need to read the prelim. It's so important. Why is it important for you to read the prelim, to understand the prelim? Well, guess what? You're not a title officer. You're not an escrow officer. That is our job, to make sure that everything's taken care of on the preliminary title report. But it is super helpful that you understand what's going on in the transaction, that you understand what is affecting your transaction. So when the prelim comes in, go ahead and take a look at it, read through it, try to understand it. If there's things that are confusing or you're not sure about, just pick up the phone, call your escrow officer, or shoot them a quick email. Just say, hey, when you have a minute, I'd like to learn a little bit more about item number 6. So this little blurb right here, it says you wouldn't pull up Google Maps to get somewhere and then ignore all the potential obstacles to your destination, would you? Google Maps or Waze or whatever. I know that when I travel, it's telling me that there's going to be, a traffic jam up here, or there's an accident. I'm not going to be able to get to my destination without paying attention to that accident, Because guess what? If I don't pay attention, I'm never going to get there to my, so there's a big accident. Well, guess what? Remember, there's an accident in the middle of the preliminary title report. We're not going to get to close unless we address the accident. So I think that's super cute, little blurb there. So the big 3 key items to look for on your preliminary report. The first one is liens. Liens can come up anywhere. Liens come up often, and they can look like a deed of trust. They can look like a UCC financial statement. They can look like an abstract of judgment. They can look like a hero loan. And let me tell you, the hero loans don't come out and say, I'm a hero loan, look at me. They're worded a little bit different. They're worded as assessments of contractual, so and da 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 da. So, and they're usually right behind the regular taxes. But this is one of the big reasons why I would like you to take a look at your preliminary title report, read through it, and try to understand it, or at least get a general idea of what is going on in the property. And then also like tax liens, federal tax liens, state tax liens, child support. So all of these are liens. They all don't look the same, but they're liens and they affect your transaction. No one's going anywhere. No one's getting to Disneyland if these liens are not handled. And if the escrow officer is dealing with the liens on title and they're calling you and saying, hey, I'm going to give your seller a call because they provided information saying that they have a first, but there's actually a first and a second. These are the type of situations and scenarios that you want to be abreast of. You don't want your seller calling you and say, escrow, tell me I have a second. I don't have a second. And it's just, so at least when they explain to them, this is what's happening, you're like, oh yeah, I did see that on the preliminary title report when I received this morning. I'm going to work with you and my escrow officer to find out what can be done about this, or how are they handling this? And we might need some more information from you. So just sit tight and we'll figure this out. Because guess what? If they call you and you say that, you're going to sound like I'm on top of it. But if they call you and say, hey, escrow, and they're like, oh, and you're like, I haven't looked at the preliminary, like, give me a second. I don't, there's a difference with you knowing at least what's on the preliminary title report, not exactly, not having the full knowledge, but having an idea. Ideas are great. Having an idea you're going to sound great to your client. You're on top of it and you're doing your job. Okay. Number 2 is restrictions, CC&Rs, covenants and conditions and restrictions. Basically, these are the things that are stating what can and cannot happen on the property. These are rules and regulations. This is super important in regards to HOAs, but it's just as important as any single family CC&Rs, because almost we're getting really close to 100% of the properties do have CC&Rs. They may be 1-pagers, or in an HOA, maybe 250 pages. Yes, it could be that much. I've seen it. So say you have a client and they own 3 to 4 cars and they're purchasing in an HOA, and the home only has a 2-car garage. And in those CC&Rs, it states that no cars can be left outside on the driveway or on the curb. Well, there's an issue. And if the buyer wasn't aware of the conditions, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, and now they have a problem and they've already bought this house and they said, I wish I would have known. I wish I would have known. Now I have an issue that I have 4 cars and only a 2-car garage. What am I going to do with the other 2 cars? So that's just a little example. There could be many, many issues where if a buyer would have understood what the CC&Rs had stated, it may have impacted it may have impacted the transaction, or may have impacted their decision to have purchased this particular property. So that's just one example. And then up-to-date preliminary reports. So when we have a 30 to 45-day transaction and you receive your preliminary title report, it's going to have a plant date. And what a plant date means is if something records today, Anna, the title officer, is not going to be able to search the database and find out what recorded today, tomorrow. Because there is a lapse of time where something records and then it's got to be filed, and then the data entry has to happen, and then it's got to catch up and all that good stuff. You're looking at like a 2-week window from the time that it records with the county till the information is accessible by any title company. And so when you get your preliminary title report, so today is June 16th, and you get a preliminary title report today, you're most likely your plant date on the preliminary title report is going to read June 2nd. And so when we go through the escrow flow process and we're happy-go-lucky and we're on time and everything's happening the way it's supposed to, and we get to closing and we're getting ready to record, we have to date down the property, because guess what? With 30 to 45 days has already gone by, we have to make sure nothing happened within those 2 weeks and then all the other time that has been in between. Meaning, when I say something has happened, meaning somebody hasn't recorded an additional lien or child support or an abstracted judgment or a UCC. We want to make sure that your buyers are obtaining a clean property, and the only lien that's going to be on the property is their mortgage that they're getting to purchase the property. So when we request updated prelims, this is why we're requesting updated prelims, or you hear from your escrow officer saying, okay, we're preparing for recording, we need to date down the prelim, date down the property. So or you have a lengthy escrow and we need to order an updated prelim. Now, if you get an updated prelim, don't ignore it. Do not ignore it and say, oh, Anna said I need to review it. I reviewed it. I'm good. You review the update one because it's being updated for a reason. Okay. Additional items to review. We need to confirm the seller's names as well as the property in question. Matches on the preliminary title report and the purchase and sale agreement. And the reason why this is important is because you're sitting with Mr. and Mrs. Seller. Or guess what? You're sitting with Mr. Seller, not Mrs. Seller, and all of a sudden, you at your listing agreement have pulled up a grant deed, which is a good practice, and you see someone, or you see 2 people on the grant deed, but only one person is sitting in front of you. Now that's a good practice to have. But guess what? Say you didn't have the opportunity to do that, or you didn't know to do that, and then you get your preliminary title report, and your listing agreement is signed by one person and one person only. And then you get your preliminary title report and there's 2 or 3 people on top. And now you're finding yourself where you're going to call that seller and you're going to say, okay, I have the preliminary title report, and Mr. Seller, there's a Mrs. or from what it looks like, maybe a parent on title. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? So you have to pay attention to the seller's name. Many things can happen at that moment, but like I said, a good practice to have is to pull that grant deed at your listing appointment so you know who your parties that you're supposed to be dealing with. Because guess what? When that preliminary title report comes in and you see 3 names, and you be like, I've already taken care of it. All 3 people have already signed my listing agreement. Or guess what? 2 people signed my listing agreement, and I already know that the 3rd person has passed away, and we're going to be dealing with the deceased person, and escrow already knows what we need, and my seller already knows. Because guess what? I'm a superstar. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing and understanding my preliminary title report and having good practices. And then later on down the road, the reason why you need to make sure that everything matches is because, and it's a good practice to pull a profile and the deed, is because when you prepare your listing agreement and eventually receive a offer, everything's going to match. Your listing agreement address is going to match, your preliminary title report is going to match, and hopefully the offer that you get, that you receive, is going to match, because that selling agent that's representing that potential buyer is also pulling in a profile and putting in the correct property address on their offer. And so if all 3 things match, you're in great shape. If later on down the road in the transaction, we get an email from the appraisers or from the lender saying, hey, the appraiser has street, you have avenue, and the contract has lane. Which one is right? So you see where this could be a problem if you're not having a consistent address all the way through. the rule of thumb, or what Bible is your plat map that's at the end of the preliminary title report, because that map is recorded with the county. And whatever that map says, if that map says avenue, guess what? Whoever has street and lane are doing addendums to correct to whatever the map says. I have a short-term memory. So review the easements, covenants, conditions, and restrictions. As I said earlier, you want to get to know your CC&Rs. A little side note on that, I just always like to mention, because I don't want anybody's feelings to get hurt, or I don't want anybody to feel uncomfortable. I just like to always mention that there's some CC&Rs that are very, very, very old, and they have discriminating language. And they have some language that is a little bit disturbing as far as discrimination, or things that, for as far as like people of a certain race aren't allowed to live in that certain neighborhood. Well, we cannot undo what's been recorded, that has been recorded from years and years and years ago. But we do put a cover page on that copy of the CC&Rs that say, we understand that these CC&Rs may have some upsetting language. Just know that. And there's a code, and that we understand, but it's no longer valid. Those restrictions are no longer valid. It's unfortunate. Our country has come a long way, but unfortunately, those are things that are of record. You just can't wipe it, because there's other CC&Rs that are in there. There's other restrictions that still stand. So I just like to say that, because I don't want anybody to get upset when they read something off, when they get the CC&Rs and they read something that, so just it's easier just to let them know ahead of time if that's the case. Make note of any issues on the report, confirm removal or understanding impact prior to closings. So anything that like I said earlier, that you come across that you just don't understand, it's just
Anna, your system is freezing up.
It looks like Anna is having a little bit of technical difficulty with the sound. We'll give her a second.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I think you're back now, Anna.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
I'm going to start the
Okay.
screen share again.
What was the last item that you heard?
Just after the CC&Rs.
Okay. Okay, then I was just saying, make note of any issues on the report, confirm removal or understanding their impact prior to close. And that just goes back to what I had said earlier, that if there's something on the preliminary title report that you don't understand or is a little bit confusing, just pick up the phone or shoot a quick email to your escrow officer. And all our prelims are hyperlinked. And what that means is any document that is referenced, that is recorded with the county, will have a blue hyperlink. You just click on it and that image of that document will come up. And then you can go ahead and review it and maybe understand that exception a little bit further. But if you don't, again, just call your escrow officer and they'll be able to go over that item with you, okay? Client signings, in the seller signing, they will sign. So the seller will sign their final estimated closing statement. I know this sounds funny, but it's not fine. We don't get final statements signed, meaning they're the final certified. They're the statements that get issued at closing. A final estimate, the reason why I say that is because there's oftentimes people ask, or sellers ask for an estimated closing statement at the beginning, or if there's termite or other bills added, in the life, through the life of the escrow, they'll ask for updated estimated closing statements. So at close, right before closing, your seller will sign a final estimated closing statement, and that's going to let them know this is what we anticipate the figures to be, that they'll have the opportunity to question anything at that time, if anything's missing, or again, this is all estimate, because if they sign on a Monday, but we're not closing until Friday, or we close sooner, we close a little bit later, proration dates are going to change. So it might be a little bit tweaked, a little bit, but they'll sign that. They'll sign a closing disclosure about 50% of the lenders require a closing disclosure to be signed by the seller on or before the buyer signs their loan documents. So we oftentimes try to get the seller in before if the loan docs get issued. And that's not difficult to do, only because the lenders are really good about letting escrow know, hey, the CD is going out. And the CD going out to the buyer means that they're getting their numbers with their final disclosures, and then within 3 days of that date that they get the CD, the buyer is going to be signing loan docs. So by us being notified that the CD is going out to the buyer, it allows us to go and call Mr. and Mrs. Seller, or Miss, just maybe a seller is an LLC or corporation. We call that seller and say, okay, we're getting ready to close here. We'd like to call you in to sign your final escrow documents. So they'll sign the closing disclosure, they'll sign a grant deed, any and all tax forms. If your seller has a particular tax situation and they need these forms ahead of time, super easy forms to provide. They're at our fingertips. So just give us a call and say, hey, escrow, can you send seller all the tax forms that they're going to need to sign and fill out at signing ahead of time, so they can maybe get their CPA to help them fill it out or advise them within those tax forms, because you do not want to be, you do not want to have your seller at signing calling you and saying, what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to do this? How do I fill this out? Because guess what? We cannot advise them how to sign, how to fill those out, and neither should you. Okay, so those tax forms can be provided ahead of time before the signing. Just go ahead and give your escrow officer a call, and they're at their fingertips. Okay, and then disbursement instructions are going to be signed and filled out at the time of signing. This is super important, because if their funds are going to be wired, this is where they'll provide us their wiring instructions. We typically do not like to have these instructions emailed to us. And we can receive them over the phone, but we don't like it because mistakes can happen. Numbers can sound, a number can sound one way as a seller is saying it, and the escrow officer is hearing it. So it's best that the seller provides these disbursement instructions, especially if their funds are being wired at the signing. And then, even though they filled out this form themselves and signed it, we will be calling them before we wire their forms out to go ahead and verify what they inputted. And the reason why I say this, please tell your sellers that this is going to happen, because we do get sellers that get upset at us because they said, well, I already gave that to you. I wrote that down there. And it's like, yes, but we just want to verify. We want to keep your money safe, number one. And number two, mistakes happen. Sometimes they're excited and they're, in the signing, and they get distracted and they miss a digit, or they put an extra digit. You just never know. And it has happened. We call a seller and they're like, yeah, that's right. And they're not paying attention to us, and their money is in somebody else's account. So you don't want this to happen. So just let them know, stop, take a moment, make sure that information is correct, and escrow will be calling you a second time to verify that it's correct before they send your money. And then the car acceptance form, or car acceptance escrow instruction form that our office generates, basically letting them know that we've handled everything. This is how we perceive the contract to be. So it's a form that just details out the contract and how we understand the contract to read. Okay, so that's what the seller will be signing. And then for the buyers, in the buyer signing, they will sign their estimated settlement statement. And we do not generate buyer CDs. We only generate buyer estimated settlement statements, because the CD is it's a lender form. It's the lender's form that they generate. So they will sign that within their loan documents, but we have them sign an estimated settlement statement, rate and term, and that is an escrow addendum for us that says, this is what your interest rate is for this loan amount, and however long. Okay. And in that also, escrow addendum will also put in there, this is how we understand you've instructed us for your vesting to read. So it'll also have their vesting on the rate and term. Okay. And then the preliminary change of ownership. This is super important that they pay attention to this form, depending on their situation. If they are 55 and over and replacing a principal residence for a new principal residence, it's important that they check the appropriate box. And then also the second page of the preliminary change of ownership, if this is it's a single family residence, but it's going to be a rental for them, there's questions on the second page for them to answer accordingly. And then one of the last questions is the condition of the property as they perceive it to be at the time of sale, meaning fair, average, meaning poor, fair, average, or good. And that assessor's office takes that into consideration when they assess the property themselves, and they want to get the opinion of the new homeowner. Qualified substitute, it's basically a form that the buyer's signing for us, stating that they are substituting us to make sure that the seller is reporting accordingly as far as FERPT is concerned. Okay, so they're signing this form so then we can do the job for them to ensure that the seller is reporting accordingly and actually filling out the forms accordingly and submitting the forms, so then they don't have to do it. So that's a qualified substitute. An info sheet, this helps us if the buyer is not going to live in the property right away and they want a mailing address other than the property in question. And then it just reiterates a lot of information that was given to us at the beginning, because sometimes things change. Sometimes they wanted, they gave us information at the beginning and it's changed since. An escrow can go anywhere between 30 to 45 days and things change. So, and then the whole set of loan documents, if they are obtaining financing to purchase the property, if they're paying cash, of course, there won't be any loan documents for them to sign. If there's a spouse if the buyer is married and the spouse is not taking part in the transaction, California is a community property state. So what that means that is anything that one spouse owns, the other spouse potentially has interest in. So so if there's only one spouse taking the property or purchasing the property, the other spouse do have to sign a interspousal deed, which relinquishes any said or unsaid interests to the property. Okay, and disbursement instructions, we do give an estimate, so there's oftentimes money left over, whether it's a few dollars or a few $100s. This allows the buyer to instruct us on what to do with that money that's coming back to them, the overage that we were provided. Okay, and again, the car acceptance just the same as what the seller had signed. Okay, the closing date, there are a number of factors that can affect your close of escrow date. Okay, Linda said the other day, we were in an office and she said, I didn't even think about it like this, but she said, when a woman's pregnant and they give a due date, that's their target date. But sometimes the baby just doesn't come at the due date. If you're lucky, great. But sometimes it doesn't. So we escrow officers and escrow staff, we do everything we can to make sure we hit that date. Unfortunately, there are things that are out of our control. We're at the mercy of other entities. So from signing to closing, we try. Sometimes things work out perfectly and in an expedited manner, and we get to close before that date. But just like anything else, we have to get instructions and everybody has to be in agreement to close early. So once loan docs are signed, they go back to the lender for final review. Okay, some lenders require the original packages to be in their possession before they fund. Some lenders are okay funding on a scanned copy, and some lenders require us to upload their documents to their portal instead of scanning. them over like in an email form. But all lenders are different. So it depends on the lender as far as the review and the review time. So from the time that your buyer is signing to the time that the lender is in a position to fund varies anywhere between 24 to 48 hours, depending on the lender. And then at the time, once they review it, they will issue us, if any, funding conditions. So that means they've reviewed all the loan documents and checked off most of their items that have been satisfied and that are satisfactory, but there might be some few trailing items that they need. So they're going to send a list to escrow, and if there's a mortgage broker involved or the loan officer and the loan processor, they're going to send a list of funding conditions to us and ask us, once these conditions have been met, send them in and we sign them off, we will be in a position to fund. So that's what it means when an escrow officer has advised you, we've received funding conditions and we're working on them. Sometimes we're going to have to reach out to the agents because there are some funding conditions that require the agent's assistance. So if your escrow officer is reaching out and saying, I have funding conditions, I need your help, it's super helpful if you jump on them because they might be forms that they don't have access to. So I just a little bit of a suggestion is when you get that phone call, try to be as helpful as possible and as quickly, and try to help them as quickly as you can. Okay, because there is a window, there's a funding time window. Sometimes lenders give you till 10:30 in the morning to fund. Sometimes they give you till 12:30, and there are a few lenders that give you to 1:30, which it's helpful. So buyers' closing funds must be given to us by a wire or cashier's check. If a buyer is wiring from a credit union, it's best that they wire a day in advance if possible. And the reason why we say this is because oftentimes I think all credit unions except Golden One, I want to say, they wire only one time a day. So if your buyer is going in to the credit union at 10 in the morning and they say, I wired, the bank, you should have it any minute now. Guess what? They went in and they set up their wire at 10, but that credit union is not releasing that wire until noon. And that means I won't get it until probably almost 2 o'clock. If, depending on who the credit union is. If the wire was sent from Wells Fargo at 10 in the morning, chances are I'm going to get it very quickly because it's a Wells Fargo to Wells Fargo because that's who our trust account is. But if it's from Bank of America or Chase or Union Bank, all the institutional, they tend to get to us fairly quickly because they don't hold on to their wires. Once you go in and set up the wire, they go ahead and transmit that wire, they set it up, they send it out. But for whatever reason, credit unions batch all of their wires. So if you have 10 customers that come in anywhere between 9 and 11, all those customers that have sent out wires, they batch those together and they send them out at noon. So that's why I say if they're dealing with a credit union, it's best to wire them a day in advance. Cashier's checks. If we are receiving a cashier's check on a Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday, whatever the case may be, and we are expected to close on the day that they're bringing that cashier's check, guess what? We can't close. We have to bank that cashier's check according to the good funds law before we can initiate closing that transaction. So if you want to close, the day that the buyers are submitting their funds, it's best to use a wire. If not, if you're okay with it, cashier's check's fine. You're submitting a cashier's check on Monday and we're closing on Tuesday. Side note, certain credit unions do not issue cashier's checks, and buyers are not going to be aware of this and they're not going to know this. They think, oh, I'm getting a bank check from a credit union, it's good. Guess what? Those checks are official checks, teller's checks. And we actually have to wait 3 days on those checks. So credit union, wire, but wire the day before. Any other institutional lending, cashier's check is fine, just so you know that you're not going to be able to close until the following business day, I should say. So all wires must go through the Federal Reserve, which means I'm the buyer. I go into Chase Bank. I send my money to Chicago Title, and they bank with Wells Fargo. So Chase Bank sends my wire out. It lands in the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve does their thing. They check all remitters wires, and then if they think that it passes their check, then they release it to go to Wells Fargo. So there is a delay, so it doesn't go from bank to bank, just so you know. And one of the things that the Federal Reserve does is they do check remitter names, meaning they check Anna Getman. Is Anna Getman on one of our watch lists? And it's called OFAC. OFAC means something, but what it is it's basically a checklist that if I'm on a watch list for any kind of illegal activity, whether it's a terroristic act or I'm a drug lord and I'm laundering money, you know, just if I'm on a watch list, if my name is similar to anybody on that watch list, they're going to stop that wire from going to Wells Fargo. They're going to reach out to the initiating bank, Chase, and then they're going to say, hey, Chase, this person is a possible person on our watch list. We need more information. We need date of birth. We need social. We need address. We need place of birth, nationality, driver's license number. They need a lot to release that money. And guess what? It's not instantaneous. Once we provide the Federal Reserve, the bank, and the bank provides the Federal Reserve, the OFAC department, that information, they're on their own time frame. Remember I said we're at the mercy of a third party? That's one of our third parties. They can hold those funds up to 72 hours. So if we get into that situation, we will advise everybody, hey, OFAC is involved, Federal Reserve involved. So that's what I mean, why it's very important that you understand that these wires go through the Federal Reserve before they go to the the bank that they're supposed to ultimately be at. And then I talked about the final date done by our title department. So you get an email or you get a phone call by the lender and said, we funded, yay, we funded. And you called escrow and like, we funded, like, are we closing? Guess what? They fund. That means that they sent their wire from their bank and it's got to go through the Federal Reserve. And then it's the same thing as the buyers. Like, so there is a lag of time. And then so once we know that we got the wire, then we tell title, hey, title, we're ready to close. We're ready to record. And they said, okay, let us date down the property and make sure nothing has happened since you opened this escrow. Make sure nobody has recorded a deed of trust. Make sure nobody's recorded some child support or an abstracted lien or a UCC. So we want to make sure that your buyer is obtaining clean title. Okay. And then once all documents must be reviewed and approved by the county recorder, so they go through making sure there's no typos or there's no missing stamps or missing signatures or all that good stuff, that gets reviewed, and then they go ahead and record it. And then once they record it, it goes into their little portal, and then we get a notification saying you are on record. Here is your recorded documents. Here is your serial numbers. Here is your recording fees. And then at that time, then yes, we can say we're on record. We are closed. Now that we're on record and we're closed, we're going to review the file one more time because we want to make sure we didn't miss anything. We want to make sure we want to put in those recording fees. We want to make sure our proration dates are correct. We want to make sure our payoffs are good and up to date and the figures are correct. So we're double checking. So just because we're on record doesn't mean that we can start cutting checks right at that moment. We want to review that transaction one more time before we let all the money go. So, and typically it doesn't take long. I don't want to, it doesn't take long, but you have to allow your escrow unit to go through that to make sure, and they may have questions. They may have questions. And guess what? The biggest thing that we are asking for at closing is the home warranty invoice. I know it sounds silly and it sounds easy, but if you poll all escrow units, they're going to tell you the one thing that they're often missing is that home warranty. So, hey guys, just order that at the very beginning. We can't order it for you because that's a liability, because guess what? We don't know what the home has. We don't know if it has a spa, a pool, or whatever. So it's best that you guys get that ordered ahead of time at the beginning of the transaction and send that to your escrow unit so they have it on file, okay? An important reminder is we cannot overstate the importance of the communicating through our secure channels. Do not send sensitive information through email. When we send wire instructions to your buyers, don't ask as an agent, please don't ask us to send you wire instructions so you can send them to your buyer. Please don't do that because that's putting you at risk, putting your buyer at risk, and it's just not a good idea. So we are going to email your buyers directly, a secure email with wire instructions. Please tell your buyers, do not forward that email to anybody else. If mom and dad are giving gift funds or business partner is the one sending the funds in, give us mom and dad's email address. Give us business partner email address so we can send those wire instructions directly to them so they're not getting compromised. Because once our secure email is forwarded it's compromised. And that's where the hackers get your buyer's money. So wire fraud is real, just said it. If your buyer's funds are diverted to fraud, they may never recover the money. 74% of home buyers incorrectly believe their title company or bank could recover funds that are wired to the wrong account. So 52% of home buyers are completely unaware of wire fraud in real estate. So we try to educate them early on, and we can't say it enough, okay? And 3.5 billion was attempted to be diverted and wired to criminally controlled accounts in 2019, and it's only gone up since. So just, it's never going to go away. Never going to go away. And then the top tips for smooth escrow: communicate any and all changes to dates, parties, etc. to your escrow officer ASAP. For whatever reason, escrow is the last one to know about anything that changes. If your clients are heading out of town, super important. They're going on vacation, out of state, out of the country. Let us know so we can get documents, if they're readily available, signed before they leave, because then it just delays the transaction if we have to get their signature when they're abroad or they're out of town or on vacation. Who wants to sign documents when they're in the middle of vacation? So let us know. Death, solar, power of attorneys can complicate things. That's a whole different animal. If you want to know anything about that, I'm happy to sit with you and discuss that, or attend one of our future classes on those. And then if you have any questions at any point, like I said, pick up that phone, send that email, and then let us know the best way to reach you normally and when there's an urgent issue. If you want us to email you throughout the transaction for updates, but if there's a problem, if you want us to call you, text you, whatever, just let us know. And then review your client's estimated. Oh my gosh, this is the best. This is the most important thing. If you don't remember anything I said today, remember this. Review your client's estimated closing statements as soon as possible for any items missing or need corrections. Again, like I said, escrow is the last to know. So what if we didn't get that invoice? What if we didn't get that addendum? What if we didn't know anything with just review it, because your escrow officer should be sending you your client's closing statement before they go to sign. And at least you can take a look at them like, hey, escrow officer, we decided not to do the home warranty, or hey, escrow officer, there's some termite missing. So like I said, if you remember nothing, but I want you to remember everything, but at least do this. And if your escrow officer is not giving that closing statement, ask them for it. Tell them, hey, escrow officer, send me that closing statement before my client signs, because it's only going to make you look better when you catch the things that we don't know. We don't know what we don't know. Okay. And then we're closed. Yay, it's time to celebrate. We can't wait to work with all of you again. So that's the best email that I send on a daily basis is we are on record and we are closed. So I hope this was helpful. I know I started to speak fairly quickly towards the end, but I wanted to get everything in. I'm available. Real estate's not Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. I'm one of the escrow officers that is neurotic. I answer emails outside of those business hours and on weekends. If something comes up, reach out to me, send me a text at that phone number, or send me an email at that email address, and I'm happy to answer a question that you may have outside business hours. But call me during business hours too. I'd love to talk to you.
And that concludes our session today. But if you wanted to unmute and ask a question, you can. Otherwise, thank you so much for your time. We will be sending out a recording probably closer to the end of the business day today on this presentation. And as always, they are posted to our YouTube channel, which is Chicago Title Fresno. If there's any documents that were referenced during the presentation that you'd like a hard copy of for yourself or to share with your clients, don't hesitate to reach out to anyone on our team. Your sales execs have a ton of information and are happy to share with you everything we have. So thank you, Anna, for doing a great job. Thank you all for joining us today. We'll see you on the next class. It looks like there's a couple things. Oh, there's just some thank yous in the chats. So we'll see you at the next one. Bye-bye.